Hi everyone. This is Professor Mohammed Farghal. This is my first live lecture. Today I'm going to talk about nature of language. First, I'll be looking at the general features that human language shares with other systems of communication. Then I'll be moving on to talk about unique properties of human language that make our language different from other systems of communication, animal communication in particular. If we look at the term language, which is one of the most familiar words we meet, you can see that it is both easy to define and difficult to define. From the layperson's perspective, language is a means of communication. That's the first thing that comes to mind. So if you stop someone on the street and ask him what language is, I would say that the first thing that comes to one's mind or to his mind would be it's a means of communication. And in fact, this is the main function of language. It's there for people to communicate with each other, to undertake different kind of activities using language. Without language, it would be so difficult, though not impossible, simply because communication would involve both verbal communication and non-verbal communication. By verbal communication, we mean communication where either spoken words or written words are used. So it covers both spoken communication and written communication, as used symbolically. The other side of the coin is nonverbal communication, which is equally important, but it cannot get us that far insofar as academic activities are concerned. So under nonverbal communication, we have different types of gestures, posture, spacing, the way we space each other, ourselves from each other, facial expressions, eyeing, all these would come under what we call nonverbal communication. But first, let's focus on verbal communication, which covers both speaking and writing. The term communication entails the presence of two parties. So in order for communication to take place, we have to have two parties, a producer and a receiver. The producer can either be a speaker or a writer, and the receiver can be either a hearer or a reader. Without the presence of two parties, one cannot claim that communication has taken place. One would imagine someone, for example, singing in the bathroom without anyone eavesdropping. In that case, communication is not taking place. Or someone who has written a love poem, then just tearing it after it has been written and dropping it in the wastebasket. Again, such situations would not involve communication. In order for communication to take place, we have to have a speaker and a hearer, or a writer and a reader. What's spoken has to be heard by someone, and what's written has to be read by someone. in order for communication to take place. Non-verbal communication, on the other hand, is important, and it is socially oriented rather than information oriented. This simply means that by non-verbal communication, we can express lots of emotions. It's true that sometimes we can use it apart from verbal communication. For example, you can wave to someone and the function of greeting has been performed. But it wouldn't get us that far if, for example, you are giving a lecture about the nature of language. I wonder how would nonverbal communication help you there. It may help you only when, for example, when greeting students or making certain gestures, but otherwise it would not come to your rescue there. For information-oriented kind of communication, we in fact need verbal communication, whether it is spoken or written. And that's exactly what's happening in this lecture. This doesn't mean that verbal communication is more important than non-verbal communication. In fact, they are equally important, or one even can claim more importance for non-verbal communication in certain situations. For example, if someone is not looking very well, and you ask him, what's wrong with you? And he responds by saying, I'm okay. Nothing to talk about. Would you believe him or believe the way he looks? Of course, the way he looks rather than his words. Nonverbal communication is universal in nature insofar as it's there, but when it comes to its features, we may have different aspects of nonverbal communication or different interpretations of elements of nonverbal communication in different cultures. Spacing, the way people space themselves from each other, may differ from one culture to another. For example, Arabs prefer to space themselves closely to each other. And this contrasts with Anglo-Americans, for example, who always keep a kind of distance between speaker and hearer. So you can imagine an Arab conversing with an American, and the American keeps stepping backward while the Arab is stepping forward. This indicates the way we look at spacing, posture, the way you sit, for example. Are you sitting up or sitting back? What posture do you keep when you talk to someone? This is very indicative of whether you are interested or not. If you are sitting up when someone else is talking to you, this means you are very interested. If you look down while someone else is talking to you, it means you are not interested. So it's another way of saying, get out of here. If you start looking at your watch when someone is talking to you, this is a signal that you are not interested or you are busy. And the interlocutor is supposed to interpret such nonverbal elements and behave accordingly, or even sometimes defy them, challenge them by saying, why are you looking at your watch? For example, you are my professor and you are supposed to give me some time. This is quite possible, though not very likely. If we go back to the term language, can see that language is a general term and it may cover all systems of communication, not only human language. What features, for example, what common features are found between human language and animal communication? Is it enough for a student of language and linguistics to define language as a means of communication? This is quite satisfactory to someone who's not interested in language and linguistics. But for someone like us, some people who are interested in the nature of language and linguistics, we're not satisfied with such a definition. We need to know more about the nature of language, of systems of communication. And the first feature, common feature that comes to mind is the presence of sounds or noise. This is common. Noise, for example, exists in both human communication and animal communication. But now, if we look at human communication, we can see that even this component, the presence of noise and sounds, is different. It's, I would say, both similar and different. It's similar because it involves vocalizing something, whether in the form of distinct sounds or in the form of noise. Human sounds are distinct. We can produce discrete sounds. This is not available when it comes to cats, for example. A cat cannot produce distinct sounds. A cat can produce noise that is interpreted by other cats to mean something. But as humans, we can both produce distinct sounds or discrete sounds as well as noise. This is noise, isn't it? But when I say there's a cat in the garden, the word cat can be broken down to discrete sounds. Cat, and ta. These are the sounds that make up the word cat. Note that these sounds do not have meaning by themselves, but they change meaning. If I replace any of the sounds in cat with another sound, then I would produce a word with a different meaning. So if I replace cat with sat, or with fat, sat, or with hat, had, these words have different meanings. The same applies to the vowel. Bit, the vowel in bit. If I replace it with E, I produce the word beat. If I replace it with A, I produce the word bat. And these have different meanings. And this is such pairs we call minimal pairs. And sometimes we have sits, for example. If we say bit, bat, beat, bite, boat. Okay, this is a minimal set. This means the words are the same except for one contrastive sound. And the contrastive sound changes the meaning. And that's why we call these minimal pairs and minimal sets. So when it comes to sounds and noise, this is a feature shared partly between humans and animals. Noise is shared. Sounds are not shared. They are unique to human language. We produce sounds, distinct sounds, discrete sounds. Animals cannot produce discrete sounds. They produce noise and the noise they produce is interpreted by other members of the species. The mewing of a cat, for example, or the barking of a dog could mean different things in different contexts. Another important feature that's shared between human language and animal language is the fact that whatever is produced is conventional in one way or another. Conventionality. This means meaning is attached to something that is conventional. So the word cat denotes some animal in the outside world. The word read denotes some activity which are familiar with. And this conventionality is also common to human, to both. It's also common to animal communication. How is that? A cat mews in different ways to signal different things. Some mew could mean that the cat is hungry. Another could mean that the cat is angry rather than hungry. A third may mean that the cat is in danger, etc., and so forth. And such meanings that are attached to such mews, different mews, are conventional. And in fact, conventionality of meaning is basic to any type of communication. And this is clearest, of course, in human communication, simply because we grow up learning words. And the meaning that are attached to these words is conventional. Word meaning is conventional. And this is the foundation stone in human communication. We grow up learning what things are called around us, learning words. And this is what we call denotative meaning, which is probably the most important type of meaning. It's true that it's not the only type of meaning there, but this is not our topic today. But it is the cornerstone in animal communication, the fact that there are words and words have conventional meaning. Now, what happens when we string words together? We produce phrases and sentences. But we do not do this haphazardly. There are rules governing the way we string words together in order to produce phrases and sentences. So language is rule governed. And again, this applies to both human communication and other systems of communication, all right? It cannot be haphazard elsewhere. For example, when bees communicate with each other, all right, there must be some rules governing what they produce. This is much clearer, of course, in human communication. Why? Because we have grammar, the machinery that generates our phrases and sentences. So rule, right, the fact that any system is rule governed is both common to animal communication and human communication. But does this mean that human language is identical with animal communication? And the answer is, of course, in the negative. The answer is no, a straight no. Why is that? It's because human communication has some unique features that do not exist in animal communication. And the most important feature is the fact that human language is productive. Productivity of human language. What do we mean by that? We simply mean that by using a small number of rules, a finite number of rules, a limited number of rules, we can produce an infinite number of sentences or a boundless number of sentences. So the sentences we produce are boundless, but the rules we use are bounded, are finite. We have internalized a number of rules, and when we put these rules to use, we can produce an infinite number of sentences. And this productivity of human language works both at the production level as well as at the reception level. At the production level, I can produce sentences that have never been produced before. I can talk about the monk, for example, dancing on top of the palm tree. What enables me to do this? I'm sure that, okay, a sentence like, look at that monk dancing on top of that palm tree. Sure that this sentence has never been produced before, but I'm able to produce it. What enables me to do this? It is the productivity of human language. The fact that I fall back on the rules I have internalized, and I produce whatever sentence I want to produce. This also works at the reception level. I don't stop someone talking to me, telling him that this is the first time I'm hearing this sentence. This is quite unlikely. Not only unlikely, but it's crazy. All right, so you don't complain that you're hearing a sentence for the first time, but you may tell someone that this is the first time I hear this word. All right, this makes sense. Why? Because words are stored in our lexicon, and it's a matter of encountering the word and learning it. It's a matter, in other words, it's a matter of memorization. We memorize words, but we don't memorize sentences. We internalize rules. And these rules enable us to generate as many sentences as we like. Sentences we have never heard before. Novel sentences. So it would be odd to say that I have learned a new sentence today. You learn a new expression, you learn a new word, you learn a new rule, but not sentences. Sentences are to be generated rather than learned. That's what we mean by productivity of human language. The other side of the coin is the unique feature that human language is transmitted by culture. It all depends on where you're born. If you are born to a Chinese family, you grow up speaking Chinese. If born to a Jordanian family, you grow up speaking Jordanian Arabic, etc. and so forth. So it's the culture you live in that gives you the identity of your language, but not the ability to learn a language, which makes a lot of difference. In animal communication, the system of communication is transmitted by the species rather than by culture. That's why if you bring an American cat to meet a Jordanian cat, I would assume that they would be able to interact and communicate with each other. But if I brought in a Chinese person to speak to you about the nature of language in Chinese when nobody in the group knows Chinese. What he produces would be mere noise to you. Would be like what? Like a car braking or a dog barking. Of course, okay, his speech will be accompanied by nonverbal communication, and the nonverbal communication might give you some clues to what he says. Okay, but overall, you would not be able to understand the content of what he says. Why? Because he belongs to a different culture. He speaks a language you don't speak or you're not familiar with. These two unique characteristics or properties of human language tell us apart from the animal kingdom. The fact that human language is productive and the fact that human language is culturally transmitted make us different from other species. There are other unique properties of human language. Arbitrariness, the fact that meaning in language is arbitrary. What do we mean by that? This simply means that there is no way to explain why X is called X rather than Y. Why, for example, a cat is called a cat rather than a dog, or why a dog is called a dog rather than a camel, or why a disk is called a disk rather than a chair. The relationship between the form, that is the word disk, and its meaning, the object in the outside world, is arbitrary, is accidental. There's no way to explain why a disk is called a disk or why a dog is called a dog. That's because the relation between the signifier, that is the word, and the signified, that is the object in the outside world, is arbitrary. This is the rule in human language. Of course, there are exceptions, and the exceptions comprise some onomatopoeic words or imitation words, which exist in language, but they are the exception rather than the rule. For example, ticking of tick, the ticking of a clock, ticking, the splashing water, splash. Okay, so these words imitate the acts. That's why they are called imitation words. But these words are the exception rather than the rule. The bulk of human language is arbitrary in nature. The relationship between the signifier and the object it signifies, technically they are called signifier, signified, the relationship between them is arbitrary. And in fact, it's true that many people look at this relationship as vertical in nature. We can see that there is something mediating between the signifier and the signified, or between the form and the object. One of the language philosophers of the 30s and 40s, Charles Morris, or rather Charles Peirce, called this interpretant. The interpretant mediates between the signifier and the signified, between the form and the object, in order to enable us to make sense of what we hear. How is that? That's because words in language have multiple meanings. Every word, I would say, in English or in Arabic, in Chinese, must have multiple meanings. In other words, words are ambiguous. So what enables us to make sense of the same word in different contexts? It is something that mediates between the signifier and the signified, which Peirce calls interpretant. So, okay, that's what we mean by arbitrariness of human language. Another unique property of human language, which we often refer to, is displacement, right? We, as humans, we believe that we are the only species on this planet that can displace communication. What do we mean by displacing communication? Simply means that we can talk about our past, our distant past, and also we can talk about our future, even our distant future. You can talk about what you're going to do 10 years from now. Also, you can talk about what you did 10 years ago. Can a cat do this? The answer is no. We believe that animals can only communicate things relating to the present moment. So a cat can tell another cat that there are some dangerous cats somewhere around, something relating to the present moment. But a cat cannot tell another cat that she had met a nice tomcat the week before. At least that's what we believe. So displacing communication, we assume, is a unique feature of human communication, something that is not present in the animal kingdom, in the systems of communication found in the animal kingdom, among cats, bees, dogs, what have you. So as we have seen, systems of communication are similar in some respects and are different in others, especially when it comes to human language. And what makes our language different from other systems of communication is the fact that there are some unique properties. And these unique properties are so important. They make our language different from other systems of communication. In particular, we refer to cultural transmissibility, the fact that human language is transmitted by culture, and the fact that human language is productive, is generative. When Noam Chomsky, the American well-known linguist, offered the sentence, "Colorful ideas sleep furiously," in the early 60s, he wanted to tell us two important facts about the human language. The fact that human language is productive, and the fact that human language is rule-governed. When it comes to being rule-governed, he wanted to tell us that we have syntactic rules and we have semantic rules. Syntactic rules produce grammatical sentences. So the sentence, "Colorful ideas sleep furiously," is grammatical. There is nothing wrong with the grammar of this sentence. We fall back on the finite rules we have internalized and we produce sentences like this. But do we accept it? Do we accept it? This is another question. So there are semantic rules. Our sentences are supposed to make sense. It's not enough for them to be grammatical. They're supposed to make sense as well. And this sentence does not make sense. Why is that? Because it violates some selectional restrictions. Colorful ideas. Ideas cannot be colorful. So the adjective colorful is not suitable when it comes to describing ideas. Sleep furiously. Sleep. Can ideas sleep? Again, this is okay. The verb sleep requires a subject that is plus animate. The subject must be plus animate. Ideas are minus animate. That's why this sentence is odd, unacceptable, at least for the time being. But the other thing probably he wanted to tell us, which he did not make explicitly, is the fact that human language is productive. The fact that what's not acceptable today might be acceptable tomorrow, or who knows? We do not refer to ideas as sleeping these days, but this is quite likely in the future. We can talk about pregnant ideas. Can an idea be pregnant? Human language here is productive. So it's apparently he wanted to tell us two basic things about human language. The fact that human language is productive, and the fact that human language is rule-governed. It's not only productive. This means figures of speech may change from time A to time B. Even rules may change from time A to time B, though rules change slowly. For example, what's used to be ungrammatical is now grammatical. For example, the use of the relative pronoun who to stand for the logical object was at one point in time considered ungrammatical. So, who did you see? Who did you see last night? What figures of speech may change. Rules also may change. There are some prescriptive rules that are no longer observed. Someone knocking at the door. Who is it? It's me, Joe. Me. According to, for example, according to purists is not the correct form. You're supposed to say it's I, June, rather than it's me, June. Do we observe such a rule? And the answer is no. Of course, there are some purists who observe such rules. Even sometimes they go too far by saying between you and I, thinking that this is the correct form. But in fact, it is the incorrect form insofar as prescriptive rules are concerned. We're supposed to say between you and I, between you and me. Why? Because me is governed by the preposition between and should be assigned the genitive case. This is what's called hypercorrection, being too sensitive to using correct use. And in this case, it fires back. Why? Because between you and I here is not similar to the I and it's I, June. This is called hypercorrection. Okay, let me move on to talking about making meaning in language. How is meaning made in language? Making meaning. Something that relates to what I have been doing in this lecture. Productivity of language and cultural transmissibility of language. There are two principles governing language production, making meaning in language. The open principle and the idiom principle. The open principle derives from the productivity of human language. The fact that there are slots in sentences and we fill in these slots by observing both syntactic as well as semantic rules. So this is a matter of using language productively. But this is basically a matter of what? Stringing words together. Okay, so we have content words and we have function words. First, we choose the content, all right, the content words which carry the meaning, then the function words which make our sentences grammatical. So the cat is eating the hamburger. Here we have some content words. We have eat, cat, hamburger. The meaning is carried by these words. Then we have functions, the function stuff which renders our sentence grammatical, referring to something that's happening right now. The second principle, the idiom principle, by contrast, enables us to fall back on set phrases, prefabricated expressions, fixed expressions, which are all around. And we just pick up such expressions and use them in communication. Proverbs, for example. Is it a matter of stringing words together? And the answer is no, it's not a matter. Birds of a feather flock together. It's not a matter. I don't first choose the content word bird, then the content word flock, then the content word together. It's not that. But rather, I fall back on what I have learned from the community I belong to. Assuming that I am a native speaker in Arabic, I would say الطيور على أشكالها تقع. So it's the same principle. Idiomatic expressions which number in tens of thousands in both English and Arabic and other, as well as other languages. Is it a matter of stringing words together? And the answer is no. Okay, a piece of cake, for example, is usually used to say that something is very easy rather than to refer to food. So when you say, my test this morning was a piece of cake, you're not talking about food. So a piece of cake here is an idiomatic expression. And it has been picked up as one unit. It has what we call a unitary meaning. And it's not possible, or at least not likely, that we tinker with such expressions. Sometimes we do, but when we do, we have to motivate the meaning we are communicating. Assuming that, okay, you, instead of saying it was a piece of cake, you said it was a piece of shit. All right, a piece of hell. Okay, so you are remodeling a familiar expression to indicate that the test was so bad. Even one can go further than that by what? By being ironic. You say that Okay, to someone who are just taking the test, and you both know that the test was hell. And you tell him that he asks you about the test, and you respond by saying, it was a piece of cake. Do you mean what you're saying? You don't, all right? You mean it was hell. Why? Because that guy has already taken the test, and he knows that the test was very difficult. Formulaic expressions. Again, there are hundreds of formulaic expressions we use on a daily basis. Okay, the fact that you greet someone by saying good morning rather than wonderful morning is significant. How is it significant? Good morning, all right. It's not a matter of stringing the word good with morning, but rather it's a matter of calling up this greeting as one unit. That's why you cannot greet someone saying, excellent morning, John. If it were a matter of stringing words together, it would be possible to do this, but it's not. Why? Because good morning is a formulaic expression. It's a greeting, which is learned as one unit. That's why we're not supposed to fiddle with the way it is worded. If it were a matter of choosing first good and then morning, then it would, right. We would be able to produce many sentences. I had an awful morning yesterday. Awful morning. Awful can be replaced with many adjectives. Wonderful morning. Terrible morning. Lousy morning. What have you? Why is that? That's because there I'm using the open principle. But good morning as a greeting, I'm using the idiom principle rather than the open principle. Which is more important, the open principle or the idiom principle? And the answer is they are equally important. In most sentences we produce, we fall back on both. When you say, my test was a piece of cake, yesterday you have used both the open principle and the idiom principle. That's why they complement each other. They are equally important. One cannot say that the open principle is more important than the idiom principle or the other way around. It's really a matter of focus sometimes. Matter of focus. It all depends on who's talking or who's writing. How much do we fall back on the idiom principle and how much do we fall back on the open principle? The open principle implicitly refers to our creativity. The idiom principle implicitly refers to our parroting what others have been saying all along. Which one do you want to be? And a sensible person will say, I want to be both. I want to be creative and I want to be culturally informed. How is that? By falling back on what others have been saying in terms of proverbs, idiomatic expressions, formulaic expressions, even collocations. If we look at collocations, can we break collocations? Sometimes we do, but when you break a collocation, you are frowned upon. Why? Because you are violating the idiom principle. Pay, for example. The verb pay collocates openly with anything relating to money, so there isn't much to write home about. To pay in cash, pay in dollars, to pay debts, to pay installments. Okay, these are familiar collocations and they are open collocations. But this can be pushed a step further in the direction of the idiom principle. We also pay visits. We pay respect. We pay attention. Does this have to do anything with money? No. Here we have what we call stable collocations. Collocations that have moved away from denotation. So the denotation has been lost partially. A part of the denotation has been lost. Why? Because we are no longer talking about money. If we move this a step further in the direction of idiomatic expressions, initative meaning is lost completely. To pay lip service. If you are not familiar with this expression, you will not be able to figure out what it means. Why is that? Because it's opaque. It's an idiomatic expression. You've got to be familiar with the idiomatic expression. It's a matter of learning that idiomatic expression. But if you haven't met the collocation pay attention before and you know what pay means and what attention means, you may be able to guess what the collocation means. But it's not easy to guess what to pay lip service means. So it's a matter of transparency here. Idiomatic expressions are opaque. Collocations are less opaque. Some of them are transparent, some of them are more transparent, and some are less transparent. And the same applies to idiomatic expressions. Okay, the point here is that the idiom principle is behind producing a huge amount of language in communication. And it goes hand in hand with the open principle. That's enough for today. And I hope you have put up with me experiencing giving a live lecture for the first time. Thank you very much. Goodbye.